Once Spartans were born, the male elders of the household decided if the youngster was fit to live and be raised. One test was to drop the infant into a vat of wine. If it screamed, it was regarded too feeble. Male children were mostly nurtured by their fathers until they were 7 years old and entered the agoge. During the initial 5 years of the agoge, between the ages of 7 and 12, the boys were shown how to read and write, but the system's focus was to focus on endurance activities, physical limitations, military skills, and preparing them to survive and deceive others. According to Plutarch, they learnt only enough to serve their turn in reading and writing. The remainder of their instruction was designed to make them obey commands effectively, endure difficulties, and triumph in combat. During this time, the boys were also trained to steal, particularly food, because they were given little to no food. If they were successful, even if the crime was discovered later and the perpetrator was plainly identified, no penalty was meted out. If they were caught stealing, they were brutally beaten. Stealing was considered a crucial survival skill, thus it was the carelessness displayed in getting caught that was penalized, not the act of theft itself. The program's initial aim was on imparting fundamental abilities that would allow one to not only survive, but also conquer. The boys also had to build their own beds out of reeds found by rivers, which they had to break apart using their hands without any tools. Any activity or habitual behavior deemed a waste of time was discouraged, even the way one talked. Youths were encouraged to use as few words as possible to convey the most meaning and strength. Speech training continued during the transitional phase, around the age of 12. Following the transitional period, students were known as hebonts and were taught by a paidonomos. Plutarch adds, under the guidance of the paidonomos, the boys, in their numerous companies, put themselves under the command of the most cautious and warlike among the irons. This was the label given to those who had been out of the class of boys for 2 years, while malerons, or would-be irons, was the moniker given to the eldest of the boys. This 20-year-old iron then directs his followers in their mock battles and compels them to serve him at his meals. He assigns the larger individuals to gather wood and the smaller boys to fetch potherbs, taking what they can, some of them entering the gardens, others going quite stealthily and cautiously into the public meals of the men. But if a youngster is detected stealing, he is harshly whipped as a thoughtless and unskillful thief. The paidonomos were selected by the district's ephors or overseers, who were elected officials pledged to preserve Spartan laws, and even granted the ability to challenge a reigning king if he did not. The ephors were among the older males in charge of overseeing the penalties meted out to the younger youths by their seniors. They would not intervene while the penalty was being administered, but would afterwards decide whether it was harsh or too mild. The paidonomos learned from the ephors what constituted excess or mercy and was frequently in charge of sanctions. All through the agoge, the boys ate together, but at the age of maturity, one had to be chosen to a specific mess, known as a common tent. There were several distinct eating messes, and a young man had to be voted to one of them. Cartledge notes that the election was competitive. A simple no vote was enough to disqualify a candidate. Once elected to a mess, all of the men in that mess ate every meal together. Certain messes were much more exclusionary sort than some others, including the royal mess, when both kings dined with their chosen advisors while in Sparta. Failure to be elected to any mess resulted with dismissal from the Spartan citizen body, and perhaps the army. The only justifications for not attending were religious rituals or hunting expeditions. Whether at Sparta or elsewhere, every man in that mess was expected to bring food to be shared and so had to be present. The main meal was served after dark, and no torches were permitted to be used to illuminate the path to or from the mess hall in order to promote the men's ability to navigate terrain in the dark, allowing them to congregate and dine in the field without alerting an opposing force to their presence. A man may marry during this final stage of the agoge, although most did not marry until they graduated at the age of 30.